lead us to victory, and everyone knew how hard it was to build it. The women who used primitive tools to open and maintain the trail represented for him the best traits of Vietnam itself. They were small but tough, ill-equipped but effective, romantic but realistic. Hao was equally intrigued with the lore of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, but more troubled about the consequences of Vietnam's wars. A journalist in her mid-40s, a cosmopolitan person fluent in English and French, she was accustomed to dealing with foreigners who trekked to Hanoi in search of information and forgiveness. We didn't know until that night that she had volunteered as a teenager to collect and bury the dead during the 1966 and 1967 bombings in the Hanoi area. This intimate contact with the carnage of war haunted her, especially the death of the young, who, as she put it, had never known love, had never really lived. For Hao, war meant nothing but suffering and sorrow. How differently a woman and man could interpret a common past, I thought at the time. As Thuan reminisced about the brave women who had inspired his paintings, Hao interrupted. Yes, she acknowledged, the women had been good soldiers, but they had paid dearly for their war service in ways that men had not. With apologies to the men in the room for talking frankly, she explained that many women had lost their sexual health after years in the jungles, returning to their villages barren, unmarriageable, condemned to life on the margins in a society that values family above all else. Stress, back-breaking labor, malnutrition, contact with death and blood had eventually robbed these young girls of the very future they sought to defend when they left home in the first place. It was not just women's indomitable spirit that counted, she reminded us, but their physical labor that made the difference, and not just during wartime. Look around you. Notice who balances the shoulder pole, who tends the markets and stalls all over the city. In the rice fields, along the roads throughout Vietnam, the main labor is done by women. They work with simple tools, shoveling rocks, carrying goods in small baskets, bending over in the paddies to transplant, and then cooking, cleaning, and caring for the family when the outside work is done. During the war, women added men's work to their daily chores as they learned to shoot anti-aircraft guns, bury the dead, plow the fields, all the while coping with air raids and the disruption and panic they brought. Most troubling to Hao was that the state had neither properly recognized the dead nor repaid the living. Plagued by what she often referred to as survivor's guilt, she lamented as well that people like herself, with decent jobs and children, had no way to make it up to the veterans who had returned home wounded in body and spirit. In particular, she feared that women's sacrifices might be overlooked or their contributions trivialized, as Vietnam moves toward an open market economy where youth and the competitive spirit will likely become more important than history, service, and community. After that momentous talk, I began to comprehend how well Vietnam hides its war scars. Initially, I had been fooled by Hanoi's old buildings and markets, seemingly untouched by bombs, by the welcoming smiles of people ready to move on to a pragmatic relationship with Americans, into thinking that the war was truly over, a distant memory. "Why do you want to talk about the war?" an interpreter in his 30s asked me. "We want to forget about it. It is only you Americans and the older people who think about it." And an elderly veteran, now a high-ranking member of the Ministry of Defense, presented the official line to me during a luncheon meeting with his delegation at Harvard in 1996. "Women in the war?" Yes, I remember how my mother supported me. It was our mothers who kept our spirits high, you know. But now Vietnam is ready to prosper and develop. We don't want to dwell on the war. I knew by then, however, that there was much more to the war story than mothers who stayed home while their sons did the fighting. And not all Vietnamese people were ready to welcome a new era without reflecting on the past. I looked at Hanoi differently after I began to see Vietnamese history through the eyes of the war generation. Despite the absence of visible signs of destruction from American bombs, Hanoi is a city whose public spaces are defined by war.